Denmark's risk assessment marks one of the most consequential shifts in European strategic thinking in years. For the first time, Copenhagen has formally identified the United States not simply as an unpredictable partner, but as a potential security concern. For a small NATO state that has long regarded Washington as the bedrock of its defense, this is extraordinary. It signals a deeper structural anxiety in Europe that American power, under its current leadership, has become not merely unreliable but actively disruptive. And at the centre of Denmark's concern is the pattern of behaviour that Europeans are now forced to interpret not as aberrant bravado, but as a deliberate doctrine of pressure. The Trump administration's use of tariffs against allies, its abrasive national security strategy, its explicit attempt to cultivate nationalist parties across Europe, and its renewed Arctic ambitions, taken together, constitute a coherent reorientation. It is economic coercion tied to strategic ambition, and Denmark cannot pretend that the threat is hypothetical when Greenland is the obvious prize in play. Greenland is the fulcrum upon which this reassessment turns. American interest in acquiring the island has moved beyond Trump's theatrical rhetoric of 2019 into a sustained campaign that has combined intelligence activities, political influence operations, and diplomatic leverage. Denmark responded by creating a night watch alert system, not to guard against Russian incursions, but to monitor American behaviour. And that inversion alone shows how radically the political climate has changed. Drone sightings, unexplained disruptions at airports in Greenland, the suspension of air operations in September have sharpened Danish fears. While Russia denies involvement and NATO allies speak of hybrid warfare, Copenhagen knows that ambiguity is itself a tool. A major power need only generate uncertainty, not fire a shot to pressure a smaller state. The Danish report quotes the line that will now echo across European ministries, that the United States no longer excludes the use of military force even against allies. In the Cold War, what would have been that concept would have been unthinkable. Today, after months of aggressive tariff threats, intelligence gathering in Greenland, and demands that Europe shoulder the burden of its own defence under the shadow of nuclear coercion, it becomes a rational reading of the evidence. The American National Security Strategy published last week compounds these anxieties. Its language about Europe facing the prospect of civilizational erasure and its call to fund anti-migration nationalist parties amounts to an attempt to reshape European policies to align with Washington's ideological preferences. Denmark, a small liberal democracy with a delicate geopolitical position, cannot ignore that transformation. The Arctic is now a zone of strategic competition between the United States, China, and Russia. And with the US bolstering its presence in Pitovik Space Base and deploying what the Danish report describes as accelerating Arctic forces, Denmark finds itself at the intersection of three major power contests. Copenhagen's fear is not simply that Washington is assertive, but that it is assertive at a time when China's rise and Russia's desperation make the region combustible. The worst-case scenario outlined in the report is stark: simultaneous regional wars, one in the Baltic and one in the Taiwan Strait. In such circumstances, Denmark must judge not who its friends are in sentiment, but whose actions pose risk in practice. And the Danish analysis mirrors a wider European unease. The Dutch intelligence services have already reduced information sharing with Washington. EU leaders, particularly in Paris and Berlin, have spoken openly about the need for autonomous defence. Even as Kenneth Harry renewed diplomatic ties on Monday, the Danish service was finalising a report that warns Europe that may no longer be able to rely on the American umbrella. Denmark's 9.4 billion kroner donation to Ukraine in 2026 pays for weapons that rely on the very alliance whose guarantor is now in question. And the report notes that Russia will try to exploit American desire for a quick end to the war. Europe therefore faces a double vulnerability: American pressure from within NATO and Russia opportunism outside it. Trump's repeated suggestion that he might take Greenland by force was dismissed as comic bluster in 2019. It's not so comic now in 2025. Intelligence agencies are trained to separate theatre from intention, and this year's Danish report shows the line has now collapsed. When a head of state attaches coercive economic threats to territorial ambition, that responsible reading is that the threat is genuine. Denmark is not accusing the United States of active hostility. It is acknowledging that the United States may act in ways that undermine Danish security. That subtle shift is the essence of the new European condition. Uncertainty replaces trust, and caution replaces instinctive alignment. This assessment is not anti-American. It is sober, reluctant, and grounded in evidence, but it marks an historic inflection point. For the first time since 1945, a European intelligence service has placed the United States within the calculus of risk rather than reassurance, and the implications are profound. Denmark will have to invest more in its Arctic security, deepen European defence cooperation, and prepare for a future in which the United States is not merely absent, but may at times exert pressure contrary to European interests. Europe's challenge is to manage this shift without hysteria or sentimentality, and Denmark has simply stated what many governments have been whispering, that the strategic environment has changed, that alliance structures built in the mid-20th century can no longer be relied upon to hold automatically in the 21st century. This is a moment of clarity. The question for Europe is whether it chooses strategy over nostalgia.